Hey guys, I'm Colin Wright, and I'm going to answer some of your questions. First question. I saw an interview you did about open relationships. Can you speak about your experiences with non-standard relationships? So this is something that comes up from time to time. I have experimented with a bunch of different types of non-standard and standard relationship types. All of them have multiple pros and cons. It's not something that I tend to focus on a great deal. One, because, aspects of it are personal, so it's not something that I want to talk about all the time anyway. And also because it's not something that I consider to be a terribly important part of my brand or personality. I don't want people to say, Colin Wright, oh yeah, the guy who does open relationships. It's not the first thing I want people to know about me, or anywhere near the most important thing about who I am and what I talk about and what I care about. That said, it's something that I'm typically happy to speak about if asked, because it is something that people are quite curious about and something that people tend to have a lot of misperceptions about. And some of those misperceptions, I think, are the result of how we're brought up most typically, and that is to look forward at the future as like a sequence of steps, and integral part of those steps is finding somebody to date and then getting married and having kids and having a family. And that's one direction you can go, and there's different variances on that, of course, but that is considered to be the pathway to success as we tend to understand it in most societies around the world. And non-typical approaches to success or perception of success, or the steps that you take on the way to whatever your success is, that's a little bit weird for people, because it's either not succeeding by those standards of success, or it's succeeding by a completely different set of standards that then could be perceived as threatening. It's in many ways similar to being an atheist, where a lot of people who are religious and have very strongly held faith-based beliefs will see it as a bit of a threat in some way, or even an insult, when somebody doesn't believe the same thing that they do. Because to them, if you don't believe the same thing, that means that you are looking at the same world and looking at the same information and coming to different conclusions. And that's almost the same as saying you're wrong or something, as if everybody who believes something that's different is, by definition, calling them liars or idiots or casting doubt upon their belief system. And I don't believe that to be the case. I think different people come to different conclusions based on different lifestyle experiences and different information that they are brought up with, and all kinds of things. And the same is true, I think, with relationships. We all come to our conclusions about this in different ways. There is no one correct way for everybody. But we are kind of brought up to believe that there is only one correct way. And all of these other ways that people do it are kind of weird, and that is amplified in the media. The weird person on the TV show is the one that's polyamorous, or that's a swinger, or in an open relationship, or who's monogamish. So these cultural ideas tend to reinforce that ideology that anything non-standard is threatening. And so I'm very happy usually to talk about this when people ask, because it is something that people have a lot of misperceptions about. But the main thing that I would say about it is that if you are the type of person who is doing a lot of work, putting a lot of effort into figuring out who you are, what you want out of life, and trying to figure out ways to optimize your life for that. So you're doing it in terms of the work you do and the relationships that you have and the level of productivity that you have for these different things that you care about, the way that you earn money, where you live, the space that you're decorating. All of these different things we tend to optimize, but we don't question a lot of the core concepts that these are built upon. I would argue that if you're going to get something that is truly customized, you have to question these core things as well. And that includes your faith, that includes the way that you do relationships, and yes, that path that you are on toward whatever success happens to mean. And so the long and the short of it is that, for me, open relationships usually make the most sense. It's a little bit different depending on the person and the situation and the time period. I've done a lot of different variations on that over the last 7 years and even before that. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to, and figuring out for yourself, but this is also what I do to figure out my relationships, look at the people involved, figure out what you guys want, figure out for who you and the other person or other people, what will fulfill you all, what you want out of life, and then figure out a relationship structure that works with that. If you do anything else, if you try to force yourselves into a structure that does not make sense for you, and that is the wrong shape, and that saws off some of your delightful rough edges, I would argue that you're doing yourself kind of a disservice. So on a case-by-case basis, with whoever you happen to be dating, one other person, multiple other people, whatever the situation might be, figure out what's best for everyone involved, create a relationship system that is best for you. If it helps, avoid putting a label on it. Honestly, the title open relationship doesn't always totally apply to the way that I do relationships, and so any label that you slap on your relationship will be inherently reductive. So if it helps, don't use the labels and just come up with something that makes sense for what you and whoever else is involved. It works for what everybody needs and what everybody wants to reach their definition of success. That's what a relationship should be. Be communicative, do well by each other, treat each other well, and you can't really go wrong. Second question today. What do you think about the normalization of sexuality? The questioner here uses the term sex bombardment, and how it impacts the lives of children, sexual assault survivors, and asexual individuals. Honestly, I can see a couple different sides of this. One facet of this is that we do live in kind of a hypersexualized time period, and mass media as a whole does tend to sexify everything, and usually in a very specific direction too. It's usually the objectification of women. There is objectification of men as well, but it has consistently throughout history, throughout a much longer stretch of history, been the objectification of women, and that has certainly had a lot of implications for women's roles and the treatment of women throughout history. So I can absolutely see that and how it's a bit troubling that this kind of seeps its way into everything. But on the flip side of that, I also know that there is a real problem with the desexification in terms of making sex a dirty thing or a bad thing, an incorrect thing, a wrong thing. In societies, here in the United States at least, where they try to keep sex a mystery or make it like a forbidden thing, and they teach abstinence-only education in terms of personal health and things like that, you have a lot more people getting STDs, a lot more unplanned pregnancies, a lot more people getting married as teenagers and not being able to live before they have a family life, which if you're choosing to do that, that's totally cool, but in a lot of cases this is out of ignorance and out of lack of experience, not out of choice. And so I do think that we need a balance here. We don't want to over-sexify everything so that some people feel left out or some people feel threatened by it in the case of survivors of rape and things like that. But on the other hand, we also need to make sure that we are not creating like a taboo around sex as a whole. I don't think that's healthy either. And I think that leads to a lot of the bad consequences as well, where it becomes this power thing rather than something that you can share with somebody else or just enjoy yourself, either way. I don't know where that balance is. I don't think we've reached it in most Western cultures that I've seen at least, and Eastern cultures as well. I think it's usually somewhat skew for my taste in almost every culture that I visited. But I wouldn't know where the balance is either. I think that it's very possible within your own community, within your own group of friends and your family and such, to create something that's a little more U-shaped when it comes to that type of thing. But I think that there's so many different priorities and there's so many different scales and spectrums in terms of what people are comfortable with, what they need in order to be happy, what makes them unhappy, that there's not going to be one correct answer. I just think that in general, as somebody who believes in freedom of information and freedom of speech, that we do need to be able to educate people on this. It's unhealthy not to. And we do need to be able to talk about it and to use dirty language and to have naked pics and pornography and things like that. But we also want to create a situation where people are not being abused, are not being taken advantage of, are not using it as a weapon against other people. And so that we're not creating a society where if you're not participating or don't want to participate or want to participate in a different way, you are not excluded. Again, I don't know exactly how we do that, but I do think it's something that it's important to be aware of. So it's a very good question. If anybody has suggestions or thoughts on that, I am open to hearing them. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to ask a question for me to answer in a future video, you can do so in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, a like or a share would be amazing. You can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet at Colin is my name. You can find out more about me and my work at colin.io. My blog is at exilelifestyle.com, and my podcast is at letsknowthings.com. So this is something that I speak about from time to time. Air conditioning.